Would you like to hear about politicians creating atrocities through war and sacrifice, which ultimately leads to countless lives being lost over the false ideals of people who think they're being right when in reality they're not? Sorry, wrong script. That one's about real life. Welcome back, everybody, to a very, very, very special video. That's right. Today, we are going to be going over every single Gundam film and TV show, Universal Century Edition, of course. But if you're looking for a guide into the Gundam franchise, or you just love the UC timeline and you want to hear a recap of it, well, this is the video for you. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is going over every show in timeline order. I'm not going to give big spoilers. There will be light spoilers here and there because certain ideas will carry over to other shows. So obviously tread carefully. Now for context, what is Mobile Suit Gundam? Obviously, there's the real life answer. This was a show created by Yoshiyuki Tomino. We're set in a world where the calendar year was restarted when humans decided to move into space because of overpopulation and natural disasters slowly deteriorating the Earth. And this was known as UC 0000. This is officially where the calendar year for the UC timeline starts. And in space, humans created different colonies where they would live on, for a time, be controlled by one centralized government faction known as the Earth Federation. But people grew to not trust this Earth Federation since they didn't live in space, they lived on Earth. And so one day, this man called Rem Daikun Zeon comes along, and he decides that he is going to spread his message of freedom, and people follow him as they naturally do. And this led to rise to an organization known as Zeon. And their goal is to independencize themselves from Earth and be free, and colonies can be in charge of their own colonies. Sounds cool, great, dandy, whatever, right? But this ultimately leads to the 1-year war in 0079, which is the pinnacle of the conflict between the Earth Federation and the Zeon. Without further ado, let's get started. So, The Origin is a show which actually serves as a prequel to the original series. With that being said, you can't watch this without having watched the original series first, because there's a lot of things that will just go over your head. This show is about the events leading up to the 1-year war, specifically Charaznable. Amuro Ray is in it, but he's not as prominent as Char. It's mostly about Char's story, because his father is the one who created Zeon, and so obviously it's in his lineage. There's a lot he has to play in here. And and because of this, a lot of original characters from the show, which are characters that we don't see much often after the show has ended, come back for this. And it's really nice to see them come back because it makes the world feel lived in and it fleshes them out, because the last time we saw them was in 1979. The updated animation looks fantastic. I mean, the show did come out in 2015, so technology was there. Like I said, you're constantly on edge waiting for the next episode. While that is the case, there are, of course, minimal inconsistencies. That happens throughout this franchise. You just kind of gotta ignore. But overall, this is a solid 8 out of 10. Y'all already know what it is. This is the original show that started everything. Like I said, this show revolutionized robots in media. The reason things like Evangelion exist is because of Gundam. This show changed what robots could be in the world and making them more realistic. Obviously, this show follows the events of the 1-year war, and specifically the conflict between Amuro Ray, who fights for the Earth Federation, and Charaznable, who fights for Zeon. You can either watch the show originally as it is, or you can watch the trilogy of movies on Netflix. Which I personally recommend. Even though it does fast forward a lot of events in the show, I think it's more cohesive than the original show. But while the animation lags, it makes up for it in its story, because this, goddamn, the story, the action, the overall impact, fuck, this show is dark, and it's gonna keep getting darker from here. Char and Amuro are basically kids fighting an adult war. Yeah, that's gonna happen a lot in this franchise. Yeah. Crazy. Okay, but yes, this show overall is a solid 9 out of 10. Okay, so now the next set of shows that I'm gonna go over are set between this and the sequel to Mobile Suit Gundam, Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. Zeta is set 8 years after the events of 79. These shows span from taking place during the 1-year war, to taking place somewhere in between that timeline period. So just be warned that, events can overlap. Certain events will coincide with one another from time to time. I think Oath MS Team is probably one of the best Gundam shows to exist out there, period. This is basically Gundam if it was the Vietnam War, and honestly, it's Gundam at its best. It's an even more realistic Gundam, which included a Romeo and Juliet love story at its core, and goddamn, is this show so good. This works as a standalone show. It is such a cohesive story in such a small package. It's less than 10 episodes, 12 episodes, I don't even know. It's a short series, but it takes Gundam and puts it in such a realistic setting. You really feel the mechanism when it comes to these Gundams. This is clearly a 9.5 out of 10. So I decided to put these two together because these two are films that go together with each other. They basically take place one after the other. There's no reason to make them into two separate categories. But this time it's about a really bad Earth Federation guy who is fighting for the good guys versus a really good Zeon guy who's fighting for the bad guys. And while obviously Zeon, as you'll see with this franchise, is mostly seen as an antagonist, they set them up. They do a pretty good job at switching up the status quo, because there's points in this where you're like, wait, isn't this supposed to be the good guy? Why is he doing this? This is not good. December Sky is a lot better than Bandit Sky, because of the way Bandit Sky ends. But I will say they have stellar animation. But the standout of these two is the music. Oof, they have some. They have Japanese jazz. It's so good. It's so good. You got to check it out. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. This is the newest entry into our UC timeline, and this came out in October on Netflix. And this is a 3D animated show that takes place during the 1 Year War, as we've seen so far. It's about a ragtag Zeon group, and it's great to see to watch this show from Zeon's perspective. It's a grounded story set on Earth about Zeon versus Gundams, of course, but this time they really do a good job at villainizing the Gundam and making the Gundam look fucking scary. And of course, this show is dark, man. It's dark like everything else. I will say, this was made using Unreal Engine, and for the most part, it looks great. But there is up-close shots where people's faces don't look natural. Just have to make that clear. Some of the best Gundam designs I've seen. I love the mix of colors in this. Great stuff. We're gonna give it a 7 out of 10 as well. We've jumped a couple years now. We're not necessarily in the 1 Year War, but the conflict between the Earth Federation and Zeon is still very, very real, as you will see later on. This is definitely one of the saddest entries in the franchise. This is a small-scale story set on a colony about a kid who truly believes that Zeon is doing the right thing. That's until that conflict comes to their colony. And so this kid, he's basically he teams up with this Zeon pilot, and this is definitely something you gotta watch once you've seen a lot of Gundam, because the show's not about the action, it's more so about the morality of Gundam as a franchise, and I think that's a very important topic, and we're going to talk about that in a second here. But the show really delves into war and morality, and it's told from the point of view of this kid who isn't necessarily good or bad, but he's just obsessed with this idea of fighting and this idea of conflict, and it all stems from the fact that that's all he knows. His perception of reality is definitely influenced by the ongoing war, the ongoing conflict. That's what makes this show so sad, is because you're seeing this kid lose his innocence over the events of real life and his real world. I definitely recommend you watch the show. Might need to grab some tissues, because there's some things in here that happen that really, really will just break your heart. Yeah, with that being said though, I think this is a solid 8 out of 10. Yeah, so War in the Pocket was really good. MS Igloo is not so good. This is Requiem for a Vengeance did 3D animation pretty alright. It looks like shit. The story sucks. It's a 2 out of 10. Okay, so now we've jumped to the year to UC 0083, as you can tell by the title, right? This story is a couple years before Zeta, but takes place on Earth. It's about a small group of Earth feds who are still remained after the war. They're still fighting because obviously remnants of Zeon still exist out there, and they're hunting them down, killing them, arresting them, whatever, right? Post-war stuff. It's a great show. It's a great show. I think it had potential to be a lot better than it was, but there's one particular twist that happens in the show. There's one little itty-bitty twist that is about a certain character and a love affair that occurs that truly ruins what could have been this show, because the twist is half-assed, comes out of nowhere, has nothing to do with anything, and just stops the show from having done what it could have done, which has been really great. Really, really great. It could have been as good as OMS Team, and some people will argue that it is, and those people are wrong. I mean, with that, it still has spectacular animation. It still looks really great. A fun cast of characters. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. Guys, we have made it 8 years after the 1-year war. In 1979 comes Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, which is probably also one of the best entries into the franchise. Definitely one of the darkest entries, because this time Char has switched sides. He's no longer fighting for Zeon, because at the end of 79, his goals are accomplished, right? Typical character stuff. You gotta go from point A to point B. He's done that. So now he's like, alright, I'm fighting for y'all now. I'm fighting for the good guys. But this time, the sides have also switched themselves, because what's happened is a section of the Earth Federation have become corrupt and evil, and they've created this subgroup known as the Titans. And so what do our original Earth Feds guys do? You know, our good guys. They jump ship and they create a new organization called the AU, Anti-Union Earth Federation, to fight them. And so we've got the AU versus the Titans. Clear, simple. Okay, that makes sense, right? Char's fighting for AU. Keep that in mind, because politics are about to get real complicated way down the line. Yes, all you need to know is for Earth good, everything else not good. This show is even better than the original, with a new set of characters for the most part. With a new protagonist. We're told this version of Gundam from a different point of view, and Amuro does come back later in the story, but he's not the main character here. Here we've got Camille, who is canonically autistic. It's great to see. Good representation. But this show is a lot darker, and has an ending that is both satisfying but heartbreaking at the same time. And this is a particular trend we're going to see with a lot of them, is their endings are so sad. If you know what happens to Camille at the end of this, well, yeah. But with that being said, this is a solid 9.5 out of 10. So like I said, the ending of Zeta was pretty sad. Well, this takes place literally seconds after Zeta ends. Now, spoilers, light spoilers, Camille is out of commission after the events of Zeta, and so what happens, we follow this ragtag group of kids, just kids, who just happen to find the Gundam. They start fighting, they ruin some shit, and so Bright Noah, who's basically one of the leaders in Earth Fed shit, I'm not gonna go over the politics. Bright Noah's like, hey, you've got to work to pay for that Gundam, and then they're like, okay, I guess we're also broke and need money. He's like, okay, would you like to fight our war? And they're like, I guess. This show really dropped the ball at the beginning and then picked it up at the end. Right after Zeta, I immediately went into Double Zeta because I was so in love with the show. I wanted more, and I watched a couple episodes, and then I stopped watching for about 4 months. That's because there was a giant tonal shift. Zeta was really dark, but they wanted Double Zeta to not be as dark initially, And so the first 27 episodes, I'll say, of Double Zeta are way more lighthearted and goofy than I would like them to be. And because of this, the show suffers tremendously. But luckily, there is a silver lining in that afterwards, the show picks up its pace. It picks up its slack, and it goes back to what Gundam is, being this conflict about morality, principle, philosophy. And it does it pretty well towards the end. And there's actually a happy ending here. It starts off pretty goofy, it gets good towards the end, and then it even has a happy ending. And even Camille from the last show has a happy ending too. It's great to see. Now, I wish I could say that you could skip this, but really you can't, because this is actually one of the more fundamental Gundam shows that you need to watch in order to understand the rest of the timeline. So sadly, you can't skip it. You're forced to sit down and watch this. With that being said though, it's gonna get a 6.5 out of 10 for me. We've made it to peak Gundam once more. So some behind the scenes stuff that I needed to bring up in order for this to make sense is Char, while he was in Zeta, he wasn't in Double Zeta. And this is because Sunrise had approved this movie, Char's Counterattack. And so he was originally going to be introduced in Double Zeta, but the studio was like, hey, Tomino, you've got to wait until the movie comes out. And so that brings us to this. This takes place 5 years after Double Zeta, and Char has switched sides once more. He's back to Zeon, and now he's a bad guy again. And it's set in UC 93. And in reality, this is about the final conflict between Char and Amuro. See, I told you there was going to be light spoilers. Final conflict between them. This is an action-packed movie that is so beautiful to watch, has some of the most gorgeous animation, but it's also really sad from start to finish. You feel the impact of this franchise up until this point, and you feel the history of Char and Amuro and what they've gone through over the course of their journey from enemies, frenemies, to friends, to maybe lovers, to enemies again. You feel the impact of their conflict. And it's sad to see that these two were, if you think about it, basically forced to fight other people's war, forced to fight their father's wars. There's a lot of father issues. We'll say this movie has probably some of the best Gundam designs, not even Gundam, mobile suit designs out there in the franchise. The Sazabi and the new Gundam just look so perfect together. With that being said though, it's another sad ending. It feels more sad than others though, simply because this is the end of their journey. This is the end of a conflict that started from the original show, and we finally seen it come full circle. And I like that it hasn't just necessarily followed them two throughout everything. We go back and forth with them, and it feels very lived in because of that. It makes this world feel realistic. This to me is nothing but a 9.5 out of 10. While the show came out in 2010, it's only set 3 years after the events of Char's Counterattack, and to an extent it is a sequel to that, but it's still its own thing, and it's still a really great entry into the franchise. And I think this is what also got a lot of people into Gundam. A lot of people, I know of many who saw Unicorn and thought it looked cool, and that was their gateway show. And I think if this is your gateway, this is a fantastic gateway, because this show does a great job of having its own story, telling its own principles about morality, but also expanding the lore of the world. Because light spoilers, this show not only goes into just the UC timeline, but it goes all the way back to when the UC timeline started, and it makes some revelations about our universe, our calendar, that will have you thinking like, damn, imagine if XYZ happened before, then we wouldn't be at a 1-year war. And it's those principles and philosophies that obviously the characters have to deal with now. These are characters whom have seen war, they've lived through the war, and they're realizing, damn, like, this conflict could have been over such a long time ago. At its core, I think what it does best is that it's telling you this story about humanity and how to protect it. And I think that is where this show works best. Banager and Maria are the core of this show to me, and I love I love their message, their dynamic, and what they're trying to say about not just this franchise, but just about people in real life in general. It's such a sweet but sad story. Also, the unicorn design is perfect, phenomenal. I'm gonna give it an 8.5 out of 10. This is a movie sequel to Unicorn. And everything I said about Unicorn is in this. It's just very watered down and not as good. It basically does everything that Unicorn does and makes it worse. The only redeeming thing about this is that there's a slight cameo at the end of the movie. While the cameo doesn't go anywhere, the implications are very fun and cool to think about. Stinks though. 5 out of 10. 5, yeah. Okay, so this time we are 12 years after the events of Char's Counterattack, and it's also a direct sequel to Char's Counterattack in that the main character is the son of Bright Noah. Yes, this Bright Noah, the same guy who slaps Amuro a lot. But the twist is that Bright Noah's son, he doesn't like the Earth Federation. Cool, great, he's a terrorist. Not cool, not great. Still though, this film does a great job at making us question what is right and what is wrong in this world, and why the world of Gundam is still so morally gray. There is this scene in the film which I think might just be one of the best scenes in all of Gundam, and one of the best scenes in just media in general, especially when you think about what is in this franchise, what we've seen up until this point. And I'm going to talk more about that later. But in essence, Hathaway is a great film about the small people. Because, light spoilers, it's about terrorism. The reason terrorism exists is because of the events, because of what has occurred between the Earth Federation and Zeon. I'm not going to get too much into it. But essentially, Hathaway thinks he's doing the right thing because he thinks that Earth Federation is doing the wrong thing. That's perfectly fine. But it's so great seeing characters at a ground level and reacting to everyday situations, and that's what this film does, while still looking spectacular, beautiful, and yet again, another fucking phenomenal set of Gundam designs, which are also some of my favorites. Yeah, I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10. Easy 9 out of 10. So now we are a lot further in the timeline. This is set 30 years after Char's Counterattack in UC 0123. And this is a complex one. This is a movie that was originally supposed to be a show, then it got canceled, and so they took all the footage they had and turned it into a movie. It's tricky. This had potential to be really good, and I would have loved to have seen a fleshed out version of this story. In essence, it's just wars continuing. Obviously, people are still fighting. There's new factions, but at the end of the day, they're similar. You got the Zanskar Empire, which briefly gets brought up here and there in the future, but they're not too prominent. Gundams have gotten smaller, and you'll see this with our next entry, but this is because since they consume so much power and energy, they've just squinched them down in order to make it easier to fight and stuff like that. Some cool mobile suit designs in my opinion. I think the F91 is a really underrated Gundam, which I would have loved to see this in a show. The pacing is abysmal. They do things like this for a fucking less than 2 hour long movie. They span over like months from what I can tell. Still cool stuff though. Iron Mask, that's just a Char clone. Yeah, Char clone. Look it up, you'll see what I mean. 6.9 out of 10. After F91, Tomino decided to leave the franchise. Now, I should have made this clear earlier, but Tomino didn't direct everything in the franchise. He directed the main stuff, your Gundams, your Zetas, but he did not do your side stuff like your Thunderbolts. But in 1993, this was basically supposed to be Tomino's last Gundam show. There's some behind the scenes stuff that we don't really need to get into, Tomino was a bit bitter. I'll say that because this is set even further in the UC timeline. Now we're in 0153, and this show is dark. It's very fucking dark. Many don't like this show. I don't mind it. I personally had a good time. No, I shouldn't say it like that. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the show for what it was. This was, like I said, this was supposed to be the end of the UC timeline, and for many it was, and for many it still is. And if this was the end of the timeline, Jesus, man, Jesus, we would have ended off on a very, very dark note. So dark. Not only is our main pilot the youngest pilot, this kid is 13, using a war machine, kill many, many people. Many people. Tomino infamously hated making this show. He hates this show, period. And you can tell. He does not care about anybody. With that being said, though, I think it is still worth a watch, in my opinion, as sad as it is, and as dark as it is. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. So, you've probably never heard of A Gundam, and neither have I. Well, not until 2 days ago. You see, I've been planning on making this video for over a year now, but for some reason, 2 days ago, I was like, I'm gonna watch another UC timeline recap video. And this one particular video just happened to bring up a little short film that Tomino made in 2009 called A Gundam, which was a short film just to celebrate the franchise's 30th anniversary. And that's cool, it's great, I wish it got more attention, but this is set even further in the distant future of the UC timeline. We don't have a specific time, a specific date, but what this story follows, there's this being called Beauty who's carrying Amuro's legacy, and that's basically the memories of all humankind. And then the main Gundam pilot, Eiji, he has to get these memories to save humanity. And instead of living on a colony, people are living on this like giant ring thing. And so he escapes from it, discovers her memories in space, and she's basically like, well, humanity can live once more. There's a lot of vagueness to this. There's no official English sub, so I've just been doing research and stuff. But I would love to see a film or movie set in this world, this timeline, because Tomino probably has lore about this, but we don't as an audience, and I'm very confused. But I enjoyed what I saw, because with this, I think this is a beautiful short film that continues the message of hope and that being a possibility in the future. Because while many of these Gundam shows are dark, they establish the idea that you never know. In the future, you never know what happens. What if humanity decides to stop fighting one day? And clearly we haven't seen it, but I've always enjoyed the notion that it doesn't matter. There will always be hope. But yeah, with that being said, I'm gonna give this. So I know what you're thinking. That's the end of the UC timeline. Well, guess what? You're fucking wrong. Before I continue to our last show, I do need to make something clear. Our final entry is not considered canon by many because it's set so far in the future that in fact it's set in every future. That's right, this is not set in just the UC timeline. This is set in every timeline up until the point of the show came out, which is not many, not now, not as much as there are now. Some behind the scenes stuff. Basically, in the late 90s, Tomino returned to the franchise to create his penultimate Gundam show, and I'm so glad he did because this entry is the most beautiful Gundam show I've ever seen. There was already other Mobile Suit Gundam show. There was already other Gundam shows set in other universes, like Wing or After War X or G Fighter. He wanted to make the final Gundam show. Obviously, we know that this is not the case, as we've seen with the franchise up until now. And so we're set in the future, where basically a catastrophe in every single universe has caused these timelines to merge and create what is known as Turn A is everything done right in Mobile Suit Gundam. While most people don't like the designs of the mobile suits, I think it fits this world. They're definitely different, they're not for everybody, but it fits this futuristic, post-apocalyptic, 1920s-esque world, because in this story, we are set in a futuristic world where people from the moon, known as the Moon Race, fight against an early 1900s steampunk driven society on Earth. This show, unlike most, which are very dark, and while they still have the messages of hope, they're overshadowed by how dark their show is more so filled with hope and compassion, while still obviously having the heartbreaking and their dark moments. And this show is Gundam at its best. The best part is that you can watch the show on its own. Yeah, obviously this is the end of the Gundam franchise, but you don't have to see anything if you don't want to. If you only want to see Turn A Gundam, that's okay. Turn A is a sweet story about learning from our past to make a better future. To me, this is that better future. You might not see it initially in the show, but you will by the end of the show. Things aren't too bad right now. We're so far in the future that the conflicts are different. People are fighting over different things, but it's not too bad. Most Gundam shows and movies go over these ideas, and they talk about these things. But Turn A feels like one of the only ones to have actually done it, to have acted upon these ideas, and serves as this finale to this long series of people fighting in space. And even now serves as a finale to everything. This show is very adorable. This is basically Studio Ghibli if it was Gundam. I highly recommend it. This show has a very special place in my heart. It's a sweet show. It's got a great cast of characters. It's not perfect, of course. I mean, none of these shows are perfect, but it does something that the other ones couldn't. It makes you kind of happy. While most entries leave you at this bittersweet to dark place, Turn A leaves you thinking, wow, maybe life isn't too bad. And because of that, I think it deserves a 10 out of 10. That's right, a 10 out of 10. So, all in all, that was my overview of the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise. Not only is it representative of real life, what life is really about, and it's kind of stupid because this is a show about robots, you know? And in this world, while many characters claim to fight for humanity, they're not. And I think that's okay, because what Gundam gets so right about real life is that it's not about fighting to save everybody. It's about fighting to save your own world, your community, your friends, your family. And that's the heart of this franchise. And I think that's shown best in Half Away. After an explosion happens and he's talking with the taxi driver, and he's just getting to know him to see where his philosophies lie in regards to like this world and the robots and all that shit, right? And the taxi driver's like, bro, I don't really care, you know, at the end of the day, like, I'm just trying to live, man. I just gotta pay rent. I just gotta feed myself and feed my family. And Hathaway has this moment where he's thinking to himself, he's like, oh shit, like, I've been so caught up thinking about the theory of life that I forgot to live life. And that really struck me, because it showed me, yeah, most of these characters aren't fighting for the world. They're just fighting for themselves. And that's what makes this franchise interesting. It takes what you know, and it makes you realize that even if the world does suck, all you have to do is just take one step at a time. Live one day at a time. If you have watched any Gundam or plan to watch any Gundam, let me know down in the comments below. I love reading your guys' comments. I want to hear what you guys think about this video, about this franchise. Or if you have a favorite or least favorite, also let me know down in the comments below. But as per usual, thank you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch me talk about military robots in space. What was oh no, no, fuck, oh shit, wait, oh man, oh nah! I forgot about G-Savior. G-Savior sucks. Until next time, see you, Space Cowboys.